You think you know Cliff Richard, the polished smile, the clean-cut image that defined British pop for decades. But what if that image was only half the story? For more than 30 years, he was living a double life, protecting personal truths while the world saw only success. Behind the fame was pressure, secrecy, and a loneliness he rarely allowed anyone to see. What was he hiding for so long? And why are these truths only coming out now? Let's uncover the real story behind Cliff Richard's double life. Cliff Richard was born Harry Roger Webb on October 14, 1940 in Lucknow, then part of British India. His father, Roger Oscar Webb, managed catering services for the Indian Railways. And his mother, Dorothy Marie Dazzely, came from a hard-working Anglo-Indian family. After the unrest of Direct Action Day, the Webbs decided to leave India for good and start over in Britain. They eventually settled into a modest life, carrying little more than hope and determination with them. As a teenager in England, Harry developed a fascination with skiffle music. When he was 16, his father bought him a guitar, a simple gesture that would quietly set his future in motion. In 1957, he formed a school vocal group called the Quintons and later joined the Dick Teague Skiffle. That encouragement from his father meant everything. Cliff would later reflect that his dad had seen something in him early on. "He gave me my start," he once said, and then he was gone before he could see where it led. His father's death left a wound that never truly healed. It simply became buried beneath fame, flashing cameras and roaring crowds. With his father gone, Cliff felt a new responsibility. He became a provider for his mother and 3 younger sisters. Even as his career began to rise, there was no room for emotional collapse. The discipline and clean-cut image the public admired may have been shaped in part by that early pressure to hold everything together. Years later, he faced another slow heartbreak. His mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. For more than a decade, he watched her memory fade. By the time she passed away in 2007, Cliff had already endured years of quiet grief, visiting her and realizing she no longer recognized him. In 2016, tragedy struck again when his sister Donna died suddenly. The loss came just weeks after he had finally been cleared of false abuse allegations that had dragged on for 2 years and nearly destroyed him emotionally. Donna had been his daily support during that ordeal. Losing her felt like the ground shifting once more. When Cliff Richard released Bachelor Boy in the early 1960s, it was meant to be playful, a cheerful pop song about a young man enjoying freedom before settling down. At the time, fans sang along without reading too much into it. But as the decades passed and Cliff never married, that catchy title began to follow him everywhere. What started as a lyric slowly turned into a lifelong label. For years, interviewers asked the same question, "Why didn't you ever get married?" Cliff never offered a single simple explanation. Instead, he gave thoughtful glimpses into how he saw his own life. In his autobiography, My Life My Way, he admitted that marriage never quite felt right for him. He wrote that he had experienced deep love and meaningful relationships. But he also understood that the career he chose, constant touring, relentless public attention, would have made sustaining a marriage incredibly difficult. One of the most publicized relationships of his life was with former tennis champion Sue Barker in the 1980s. The media treated them like a royal romance. Cliff later revealed that he seriously considered proposing, but in the end, he stepped back. He realized he didn't feel strongly enough to make that lifelong commitment. As he later reflected, it wouldn't have been fair to either of them. Fame played its part too. Cliff has spoken about how isolating it can be. Always traveling, always watched, rarely able to relax into a normal private life. Trust became complicated. Building something lasting felt even more so. Through much of that time, one steady presence remained. His close friend and former manager, Bill Leam. For over 30 years, they shared a home in Sunningale along with Bill's mother and later Cliff's own mother during her illness. Their bond sparked speculation, but Cliff consistently described Bill as family, like a brother, someone who knew him beyond the spotlight. When Bill passed away in 2022, The loss was profound. Cliff rarely shows vulnerability in public, but this time he did. They had shared decades of life, success, and hardship together. Without a wife, without children, and now without Bill, Cliff Richard's inner circle has grown painfully small. The houses that once felt full now feel quieter. His days follow a steady routine, and the spotlight no longer fills the empty spaces the way it once did. When he's asked whether he regrets never marrying, he doesn't give a clear answer. He has said more than once, "You can't regret something you never had." And yet there's often a pause after that sentence, as if even he sometimes wonders what might have been. That lingering question leads straight into the darkest chapter of his life. The moment when everything he believed he had carefully built seemed to collapse overnight. In the summer of 2014, Cliff woke up to a nightmare he never saw coming. Police raided his Berkshire home while helicopters hovered overhead and television crews broadcast live images of officers carrying boxes from his private residence. It looked like a public takedown. But Cliff wasn't even there. He was on holiday in Portugal, unaware that his name was being dragged across national headlines in real time. The raid was triggered by an anonymous allegation of historic sexual abuse. Cliff was never arrested. He was never charged. Eventually, the accusation was proven false. But in the modern media landscape, the damage didn't wait for facts. For nearly 2 years, he lived under a cloud of suspicion, his reputation hanging in the balance. He later described the experience as feeling contaminated. That was the word he chose. The stress consumed him. He struggled to sleep. He lost weight. He admitted that he sometimes felt as if his heart might give out under the pressure. It became an obsession. The first thought in the morning, the last thought at night, and the thought that woke him in the dark hours in between. By the time his name was cleared, something inside him had changed forever. The emotional toll of the scandal ran so deep that Cliff began to fear stepping outside. He admitted that even simple outings felt heavy. He would catch himself wondering if strangers were looking at him and asking silently, "Was it true?" That doubt, even after being cleared, lingered in the air around him. In 2018, he finally won a landmark lawsuit against the BBC for broadcasting live footage of the police raid on his home. The court awarded him damages, and this time the headlines carried a different tone. But for Cliff, the legal victory didn't erase the pain. He has said repeatedly that once your name has been dragged through the mud, it can never be completely clean again. Years later, speaking before members of the House of Lords, he became visibly emotional. "Will I ever get over it?" he asked himself aloud. His answer was simple. No. The accusation, he pointed out, would always exist online, searchable forever, while the person who made it remained anonymous. That imbalance cut deeply. Cliff had always loved the United Kingdom. It was the country that embraced him from the explosive success of Move It in 1958 to his knighthood in 1995. But after the scandal, something inside him shifted. He began spending more and more time in Barbados, the island he now calls home. From the outside, it looks idyllic. Palm trees, ocean air, endless sunshine. Yet, Cliff has admitted it doesn't always feel like paradise. At times, he has described it more as exile, as if he had been quietly pushed away from the only place he truly wanted to belong. This wasn't the retirement he had imagined. Perhaps that's because Cliff Richard was never just a pop star. His entire career was built on sacrifice, privacy, relationships, peace of mind. And those sacrifices shaped a legacy few artists have matched. To understand that legacy, you have to go back to the beginning. In the late 1950s, a teenage Cliff walked into a studio to record a song called Move It. The track was laid down in under half an hour. It was raw, energetic, and unlike anything Britain had heard before. That single recording didn't just launch his career, it helped spark British rock and roll. Overnight, Cliff Richard became the UK's answer to Elvis Presley. By the early 1960s, Cliff Richard and the Shadows were unstoppable. Songs like Living Doll, The Young Ones, and Summer Holiday didn't just top the charts. They defined an era. He starred in films, packed out concert halls, and received mountains of fan mail. From the outside, it looked like the perfect pop fantasy. But perfection came with a price. Cliff's life moved at a relentless pace. While friends back home were building families and settling into ordinary routines, he was living out of tour buses and studios, moving from one set to the next. The fame was exhilarating, but it left little space for anything resembling normally. Then at the height of his success in 1964, he made a decision that stunned the industry. At just 24 years old, Cliff became a born-again Christian. At a time when many pop stars leaned into rebellion and scandal, Cliff chose faith. He began rethinking his lyrics, declining certain performances, and even considered walking away from music altogether to become a teacher or missionary. Some insiders believed he had effectively ended his career. But he didn't disappear. Instead, he adapted. His sound softened, his image matured. He may have lost part of the rock and roll crowd, but he gained something steadier, a sense of conviction. Even so, that choice set him apart. He wasn't part of the wild party culture. He wasn't chasing headlines. He lived differently, and that difference quietly built another wall between him and what most people would call a normal life. And yet the hits kept coming. From the 1970s through the 1990s, Cliff reinvented himself again and again. Devil Woman, We Don't Talk Anymore, Wired for Sound, and later his beloved Christmas classics like Mistletoe and Wine and Saviour's Day became fixtures in British homes. Over the decades, he has sold an estimated 250 million records worldwide. He remains the only artist in UK history to achieve a top 5 album across 8 different decades, an extraordinary, almost unmatched record. But when you look beyond the statistics, another story emerges. At 85, the applause is quieter. One memory still lingers, someone in an audience whispering, "Cliff Richard's in the show." And then another voice replying, "I've seen him. He's not smiling at all." By the time most people reach their 80s, they begin to step back. Cliff Richard hasn't. At 85, he is still recording, still performing, still trying to stay visible in an industry that often behaves as if he belongs to another era. He continues to show up even when it feels like the spotlight has quietly shifted elsewhere. He has spoken candidly about it. In a July 2025 interview, he admitted that many radio stations simply no longer play his music. "They don't play me because I'm old," he said without bitterness, just honesty. And in today's music world, where youth often dictates relevance, he knows he may not be wrong. Unless an older artist is packaged as nostalgia or paired with someone younger and fashionable, they risk becoming invisible. But what feels heavier is the way he talks.